God bless everybody today. It's September 18th of 2023. Before I get into this video, which is going to be about Erdogan and what I believe he's going to do in the near future, I've been talking about this for some time. He's talking about leaving the EU, and he's also then would position himself to leave NATO, which then would allow him to invade Syria against the Kurds, and that would bring up Daniel 8 prophecy. On the home front, just so you're aware, this is a follow-up on my wife. This has turned horrific, and we are finding a terminal cancer, and it's basically everywhere, and they've given us about 3 months, so we have her in hospice right now in home care, and we will make her comfortable as much as possible until she's with our Lord. So just realize that we're not having any good news, and this has fallen down quickly on that front. Another note, this is my mother's birthday, September 18th, actually, now that I'm looking at the calendar. So a lot going on today in my world, I guess, more than I realized. So let's go to this story here. I do thank you for all your prayers and everything, though, in this situation. Just no good answers in this one. So on the front of Erdogan, he's talking about leaving the EU. That would then relinquish his bid to NATO, and this would then give him the freedom to basically invade Syria and Iraq and move against the Kurds, which is what I've been talking about in Daniel 8 for some time. Now, I'm going to show you this video of this man, Erdogan, and I want you to watch his demeanor. As we get into this video, it's about a little over 12 minutes long. You'll realize he's a dictator. This is not a nice guy. He scolds this reporter for interrupting him, and he won't really address certain things in his country, even though he's a dictator. He runs the show. He won't talk about these jailings of these 40 or so reporters, because he's basically silencing anyone that goes against him. Even people that are tweeting against him are being arrested and thrown in jail. So this is extreme over there. People don't have the ability to speak out freely. I mean, he's a dictator. It is what it is. But I've talked about this guy for some time. He is the white horseman of Revelation. He's getting ready to invade Syria and Iraq. He's going to genocide the Kurds, and he's going to bring a quarter of the world into war. And I want to explain something to you before we move into this video, because if he's the white horseman and he brings a quarter of the world into war through the first 4 seals, he's bringing the other 3 horsemen with him that come after the white horseman, okay? And what I mean by that is, when Jesus is holding this scroll, he's not breaking multiple seals. He's not running his whole thumb down the side of the scroll. He's breaking them individually, okay? And with each one of those events, it builds on top of each other, and each seal will build upon each other until you have a 6th seal event, and then you have a 7th seal event, which is a half an hour of silence and a selection of 144,000 before you go into that 7th trumpet phase, when you have a third of the world decimated on the first 4 trumpets, which I've talked about as the communist areas, and we shouldn't be too concerned about them, because they're probably not going to have time to do a whole lot here in the next few months. I'm just saying, even if they invade, they're not going to get too far. He's going to stop them before he does a whole lot. But if this is the white horseman, and he brings a quarter of the world into war in the next, within the first 4 seals, because the other 3 horsemen follow him, okay? They're following him. They're bringing this destruction on the world. He is a conqueror. Look at Revelation 6:1, and you look at that first seal. He is conquering, and he's a conqueror, Okay, he has a bow in his hand, and he doesn't mention the arrows, but a conqueror of a quarter of the world as you walk into the fourth seal is basically going to have a lot of death involved. And so I question the people that say that it's all symbolization and this isn't a physical warrior that goes forth and takes over basically a quarter of the world as you watch those first four seals break. And this is the guy that's going to be the catalyst that brings this nightmare upon us. Okay, so you need to understand what he is, and that he's a massive dictator. Okay, no one messes with this guy. You don't interrupt him. You watch the demeanor, and he's going to talk about him being a humanitarian and how they're trying to help people, but you got to watch Sweden, and they're harboring the terrorists, which are the Kurds. Okay, so he's leading us back to the Kurds because he's leading us to Sweden. How he doesn't want them to get a NATO bid or ascended into NATO, or the EU. So this is a real problem. He's throwing all this down on everybody, and now he's talking about leaving the EU, which would then essentially make him remove him from NATO, and then that would give him the ability to go down into Syria and Iraq, as I've been talking about. So he's just going to leave. He's not getting what he wants here, and he tells you in the video that he really doesn't rely on the EU, that they've been basically independent of all this, and so it doesn't really matter whether they're in there or not. But what I'm going to do is I've got a video here I want to show you. It's about 12 minutes long. I want you to hear it from him. I want you to hear his demeanor. Watch as we walk through this video, because it gets really sort of intense at the end. Nothing's crazy, but you can tell he's not happy with how this questioning is going, and he basically scolds her because she tries to interrupt him, and you can tell that he is going to get his way because this guy is truly a dictator. So let's go into that video real quick. So I'm going to play this video in its entirety because I believe it's extremely important to get into this guy's head. He is the White Horseman. I'm the only guy out here talking about this. No one is talking about Erdogan being the White Horseman. They're all saying he's a history lesson. The White Horseman is a history lesson. It's Jesus or it's Antichrist. And none of that makes any sense. Okay, so when you actually realize that the White Horseman is Gog of Ezekiel 38 and 39, and that it's attached to Daniel 8, and that all this will come together with the destruction of Iran, the Kurds, into a national or a 10-nation attack on Israel, possibly by the end of this year. And I've talked about that 10 Tibet date where the Babylonians in 588, 589, BC actually sieged the city of Jerusalem on a very specific date, the 10th month of the 10th date, which ended up on the 10th of Tevet. We're having a similar thing happen this year when that date will actually land on December 22nd of this year. So we need to watch that date of 10 Tevet in the Jewish calendar, which actually is December 22nd of 23. I think we will see another besieging of Jerusalem itself by this man and his 10 nations. Once Iran falls, we would see that occur. So let's watch this video. It's extremely important to get a handle on what this guy really is and listen to him. He's extremely strict in his ability to deal with people like her, and you can tell that he doesn't, if he's willing to do this in a public arena, can you imagine what goes on behind closed doors? It's going to be really interesting to see what happens as we move forward in the next 4 years. And we are moving into the Feast of Trumpets. Now, a lot of people think this is a rapture event. I don't agree with that. I believe that rapture event is in the Feast of Trumpets 27. I've explained that many times. So just realize I don't believe that you're going to be raptured in anytime soon in the next few weeks. So but let's watch this, and I believe this man will give you real insight to what's coming.
The nation of Turkey sits at a crossroads of the world, and its president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, is its preeminent leader. Re-elected to office earlier this year, Erdogan has now been in power for 22 years. Both a NATO and U.S. ally, Turkey's connections to the West are important and vital. But Erdogan will go his own way when it suits him, as he told me yesterday. We sat down for an exclusive interview at the Turkish House, across the street from the United Nations, where he'll speak this week. President Erdogan, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I want to ask you about recent comments you made. You said just yesterday that your country may abandon its bid to join the European Union. They previously cited concerns, as you know, about democratic backsliding and human rights. You've been seeking that EU membership since 1999. Are you prepared to abandon that bid?
Biz bu konuda Avrupa Birliği'nin
We attach great importance to the decision made by the EU. If the EU would take such a step forward by making such a decision, we would welcome it. Turkey has been lingering at the doorstep of the EU for the last 5 decades, and we were always self-sufficient. We never relied on contributions or support we received from the EU, so it's not even necessary for us.
In July, you suggested that the EU should admit Turkey into the EU if it wanted to see Sweden in NATO. Do you see those two issues as linked in your view?
her şeyden önce
First and foremost, Sweden's position and our current position within the EU accession negotiations are two separate things. We have repeatedly stated that we were ready to support Sweden's bid to join NATO, but Sweden is supposed to rise up to the occasion and keep their promises, because on the streets of Stockholm, we still see terrorists wandering around freely.
You did agree at the NATO summit in July, though, to forward Sweden's NATO bid to Turkish Parliament, correct? So do you expect them to take that up when they reconvene in early October?
Şu anda bizim
Sweden's bid to join NATO is being assessed by the Turkish Grand National Assembly, and that's where it's going to be eventually ratified.
When you say eventually it will be considered, do you think that will happen when they reconvene in early October? When's your expectation of when Parliament will vote on that?
bu Türkiye Büyük Millet Meclisi'nin
This is a part of the agenda of the Turkish Grand National Assembly. The Assembly will see the situation within the framework of its own calendar. This proposal will come to a vote by the parliamentarians.
So to be clear, I don't hear you committing that this is something you see them taking up anytime soon.
onun için de İsveç'in
For that to be happening, of course, Sweden should keep its promises. Terrorist organizations should immediately stop their demonstrations on the streets of Stockholm, and they should stop their activities, because seeing this actually happening is going to be very important for the Turkish people. Sweden seemingly carried out legislative amendments, but it's not enough.
What about the U.S. sale of F-16s to Turkey? Do you see that as linked to Turkey supporting Sweden joining NATO? Because the day after you agreed to forward Sweden's NATO bid to your parliament, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said that Washington would move forward with that F-16 sale. In your mind, are the two issues linked?
bana göre
I believe these two topics shouldn't be related, because while primarily President Biden said that this issue was tied to the Congress, we would always say, okay, we have the Turkish parliament. So these issues are tied to the parliament. If the parliament doesn't make a positive decision about this bid, then there's nothing to do.
As you know, there are skeptics in the U.S. Congress of that F-16 sale. Among them is the chairman of the Senate's powerful Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Bob Menendez. I spoke with him last week, and he cites a number of reasons he's opposed to the sale right now. You threatening Greek security, the jailing of journalists and opposition politicians, not joining the Western Alliance and sanctioning Russia. And he said Turkey has the opportunity to show us and the rest of NATO that it is part of the team. What do you say to that?
Bob Menendez Türkiye'yi tanımıyor.
Bob Menendez is not very familiar with Turkey, and Menendez doesn't seem to be familiar with Tayyip Erdogan either. We are friends with Greece for many decades. We have never been fighting camps against one another. It seems like Menendez has taken a hostile approach to Turkey, and he's trying to pull us toward certain discussions of his choosing. But we are not going to be part of this. Our friendship with Greece is not what they make it out to be.
What do you make of the senator's concerns, especially in light of Russia's war in Ukraine, of Turkey not joining in sanctioning Russia to the same degree the NATO alliance is and other members of the EU?
Biz yani AB üyeleri ne yapıyorsa Biz de onu mu yapacağız?
Are we supposed to do what the EU members are doing? Turkey has a different position in the world, and the EU member states have their different positions. Russia happens to be one of my closest neighbors, and we have a common history. And similarly, this is how the current process is continuing. We have launched the grain corridor. Altogether, 33 million tons of grain were exported to the rest of the world using the Black Sea. And we didn't do this just because the EU asked us to do so. It was a humanitarian obligation that we assumed.
But Moscow did renege on that deal earlier this month, and after your early September meeting with Putin, he didn't agree to renew the grain deal. Can you tell us why that failed?
Biz kendilerinden rica ettik ve onlar
We requested this from him, and he said he was going to send 1 more million tons of grain.
Do you know when that will happen? Because as we understand, those exports have not restarted.
yani hemen başlayacağını
He said that it was going to be released soon, and we were following the developments.
And do you trust him that he'll make good on that pledge?
benim yani güvenmemen için hiçbir sebep yok.
I have no reason not to trust them. To the extent the West is reliable, Russia is equally reliable. For the last 50 years, we have been waiting at the doorstep of the EU, and at this moment in time, I trust Russia just as much as I trust the West.
And what is that based on? Because there are a number of critics who will look at the leadership of President Putin and say he is not to be trusted, that even continuing to hold back on the grain deal allows him greater leverage for his war in Ukraine.
Bunlara katılmıyorum.
I don't agree. Half of my natural gas supplies are coming from Russia, which means we have solidarity. We are taking mutual steps forward, and we were cooperating in the field of defense industry as well. We can do these things with Russia.
What about the war, the continuing war in Ukraine? Did you speak about that? Do you have an understanding of how he views it? Does President Putin believe that he's winning that war?
Yani görüşmedik.
I can't say. We didn't talk about this, but I need to be very clear and very frank. It's quite obvious that this war is going to last a long time. And for the war to end as soon as possible, we would like to be very hopeful. And Mr. Putin is actually on the side of ending this war as soon as possible.
What leads you to believe he'd like to end the war? Nothing we've seen on the battlefield indicates that.
Tamam da şimdi ben
I'm just taking into account the words of the leader, and Mr. Putin is on the side of ending this war as soon as possible. That's what he said, and I believe his remarks.
Do you think that Ukraine will be successful in expelling Russia from Ukrainian territory, including Crimea? And is that a goal that you support?
ben 2014'te
Back in the year 2014, I had certain discussions and talks with President Putin on Crimea, and I was not successful in my deliberations, and I couldn't make them withdraw from Crimea. And I think it's not going to be possible for the time being either. I think time will only tell.
How long do you see this war going, and how do you see it ending?
zaman noktasında herhangi bir
It's impossible for me to give you a calendar about when this war will end or how long it will go. Only the leaders of the both parties will be able to tell you.
Let me ask you more big picture. Do you see more of a benefit to your nation's relationship with Russia or with the U.S.?
yani bu soru bir defa
This question cannot be asked to a political leader because the way I engage in politics, to the extent possible, is all about establishing contacts with the nations around the world based on a win-win scenario. Just as I have good relations with the U.S., similarly, I will have good relations with Russia. I will continue to have a relationship with the EU member states based on the same approach as well. Win-win.
There have been a number of high-profile arrests and some recent sentencings in your country I wanted to ask you about that have gained international attention. There was a former journalist named Sedef Kabash who was charged with insulting you in tweets. There was an activist named Osman Kavala who was just in April sentenced to life in prison. Another opposition politician, Selahattin Demirtas, who's been serving jail time since 2016. And your critics will say that jailing many of these people gives the impression that you want them silenced, that they're in some way threatening you. So are you threatened by these people?
sizi bu niye bu kadar ilgilendiriyor?
Why are you so interested in this? Turkey is a state of law. Such decisions can only be made by the judiciary. And if this is what the judiciary has decided to do, let the decisions or the judgments of the judiciary be respected and executed. I'm not in a position to serve in the name of the judiciary. This man you have referred to was a financier. During these demonstrations, during these protests, and
You're speaking of Osman Kavala, is that right?
I'm speaking about Osman Kavala.
But what about Sedef Kabash? Should someone be jailed and charged for insulting you in tweets?
Hayır, ben onlarla uğraşacak değilim.
No, I'm not getting involved in this. The judgments are made by the judiciary, and the same thing applies for Selahattin Demirtas. He is a terrorist who caused the death of more than 200 people, and the judgment on this terrorist was given by the judiciary again.
I will say the European, pardon the interruption, sir, the European Court of Human Rights disagrees with that assessment.
Kesmeye hakkın yok.
Don't interrupt. You have no right to interrupt. You're not going to interrupt me. And respect me. And you are going to respect the judgment of the judiciary as well. The American judiciary is a full-fledged judiciary. So is the judiciary of Turkey. And you have to respect that. We are a state of law, and inside that state of law, this is how we lived, and this is how we will keep on living.
President Erdogan, the Committee to Protect Journalists says Turkey is the fourth most prolific jailer of journalists in the world. Why are there so many journalists in jail in your nation?
Ne kadar gazeteci
How many journalists are currently in prison? Do you have any information?
I do, sir. According to the CPJ, the number doubled from 2021 to 2022. There were 18 in 2021, more than 40 in 2022.
teröre destek verenler
If they were supportive of terrorism, those who are supporting terrorism, where would they live or roam freely around the world? These people have been supportive of terrorism. They were supporting terrorism, and that the judiciary made judgments on these people.
I appreciate you answering those questions, sir. If I can, what would you like the American people to understand about the current relationship between the U.S. and Turkey?
Amerikan halkı
The American people, I believe, are following Turkey, and so long as you produce healthy news and coverage, I think the American people will have access to this healthy information flowing to them.
President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, thank you so much for your time.
thank you. Thank you.
So I think it's just an interesting perspective on this man. As you can see, no one messes with him. He's not going to allow it. He's a dictator. He runs the show over there. It's like Putin. Either, I don't know if he's assassinating them, but he's throwing them in jail, and he's silencing these people so that they can't talk against him. And like I say, keep an eye on him. Once he does leave, or he's going to invade, then he'll indicate that at this point he's dissolved his association with the EU and NATO. And they've been pushing for some time to get into the EU, and he said almost 5 decades, and that hasn't occurred. So he's basically just done, and he doesn't need them anyway. So keep your eye on this guy. I believe he is the White Horseman of Revelation, the first seal that will bring 3 more horsemen against the world. It will bring 1/4 of the world into war, as it indicates in the first 4 seals. At the end of those first 4 seals, we see what? The martyrs of the 5th seal right before the breaking of the 6th seal, which decimates the 10 nations that go against Israel, which leads us into a trumpet phase based on Revelation 8:1 and 2, which clearly states the 7th seal is broken and half an hour of silence, and then he hands out 7 trumpets. The first 4 trumpets would decimate 1/3 of the planet before the opening of the pit on the 5th trumpet, the Antichrist and the false prophet rising on the 6th trumpet, and the Lord Jesus coming back on the 7th trumpet. So realize there is a process, and the people that are linking seals or overlaying seals over trumpets and bowls are not looking at Revelation 8:1 and 2, which literally states what's coming, and there's an order of things, and it's a chronological event of 7 seals first, 7 trumpets next, and 7 bowls are the wrath of God in Revelation 15:1 last, and we're not appointed for that. And one of the things that you're hearing today, right now, is there's going to be a rapture event during this Feast of Trumpets. I do not believe that is going to happen, and I believe that you will have to wait till the Feast of Trumpets of 27, which would be on October 2nd and 3rd of 27. I believe it actually happens on October 2nd, because that is a sabbatical Saturday, and that is when the God's temple could be open and the Lord could be brought through the east gate for that rapture event on that very specific date. That is my opinion. God bless everybody. Keep praying for my wife. I appreciate everybody. It's just a comfort zone that we're working in right now. Find Jesus, find the open door, find God. It's the only way to get to Him and to the eternity. You have to find the open door, and that is Jesus.